anywhere I lied, cheated, stole something, uh, withheld a communication, held on to resentments, regrets. I mean, it was just layers and layers and layers of stuff. We had to just try and work through everywhere. And then, I mean, that's what was a bit insane. I remember calling up some companies I'd worked for in the past and going, I'm going to give you $13.80 because I took a whole lot of stationery with me when I left, and that, that didn't have integrity because I didn't ask that.
Welcome to The Glass Ceiling, the podcast where business leaders share their stories, struggles and triumphs.
There is a lot in that. There's a lot of learning.
We sort of had different views on how the business should be ran.
The next 10 years looks like for South Australia.
Tough part's the easiest.
I'm your host, Marissa Hankinson from Wavebreaker, and I'm passionate about amplifying their voices. Join me as we explore the highs and lows of innovation, entrepreneurship and leadership. From founders to CEOs, our guests will share their insights, experiences and advice on how to succeed and make a lasting impact. Get ready for inspiring conversations and valuable lessons. Let's shatter the glass ceiling, one story at a time. Hello, Drew, and welcome to The Glass Ceiling. Thank you very much for agreeing to appear on our video podcast. We're doing it in hybrid fashion because you're in New Zealand. Can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Hi, those who are listening. My name is Drew Knowles. I'm a behavioural consultant here in New Zealand. I'm currently in Dunedin, which is in the deep south of New Zealand, and I live in Queenstown, which is a beautiful, stunning part of New Zealand.
I am actually a little bit disappointed because last time we had a chat, you showed me the view outside of your window in your office in Queenstown, and it is just beautiful mountains and snow-covered, and it was just breathtaking. So I thought we were going to make all our viewers a little bit jealous of your view.
I think I promised you that when I first booked this. I didn't even think about that. I would have been there. I said, yep, this will be the view.
Yeah.
So anyway, you can edit that in behind it if you need to.
Okay, we can always impose it on the green screen, your Queenstown background. So tell me, what are you doing where you are now? Because you said you got up at 5 a.m. this morning and did a big drive.
I did.
So tell us what you've got planned for the next few days.
Well, Queenstown is in the South Island, for those who don't know, and also Dunedin, where I am, which is a beautiful city here. And they're about just under 4 hours apart. So I have a big client here that I'm working with, their whole executive team and about 20 of their senior leaders, a really big manufacturing company. And so I've got a full afternoon this afternoon with a whole lot of their senior leaders, and then all day tomorrow from it's always big days when I travel like this, from sort of 8 o'clock or something in the morning through to about 7 or so at night tomorrow night. Okay. Finishing with one of the founders is over from overseas, actually. So yeah, just a big day, and that'll just be team sort of workshop stuff, one-on-one coaching, advising, conversations, just a myriad of different stuff, working with all those individuals in those groups.
So that's going to bring me to prompt to say, so what is a behavioural consultant?
Well, I've kind of made that term up because I've been doing this sort of work probably a little over a couple of decades now. Started more in the kind of health, well-being, fitness area, but was always really into the kind of personal development, personal growth side of things. And in my early 20s, I started working for a big global training company that was very much in that bucket of leadership development, personal growth. Sort of think Tony Robbins. A lot of people know Tony Robbins, that sort of stuff, but not quite as big events and rah-rah. And so I got into that in my early 20s, and the company I worked for about off and on for about 9 years, 10 years, was about 80, 90 hours a week, which I look back and it was just like,
that's not very good behavior.
No, exactly. Right. I definitely unraveled certain work habits after that. Luckily, I had my whole kind of health and well-being background, and I was a personal trainer in my early years while I was studying at uni and went overseas and all this. So I managed to somehow not find some balance, but make sure my health and fitness was okay. But it was very unsustainable. The upside of it was, though, both from a personal coaching, psychology, behavior, that world, you do your hours, like it was just thousands and thousands of hours with individuals and groups. And then lots and lots of public delivery, like delivering seminars, workshops, weekend programs. And so people often ask me, do I have a master's, or even sometimes people joke about a PhD in psychology. I don't. I actually have a degree in applied science, which was a bit more general, but I joke that I have a, sort of practical PhD in human behavior, because after you spend that much time just immersed in studying humans, but we also, during that sort of early part of my career, we had to peel the onion layers back on ourselves in radical ways that I don't think I'd ever recommend anyone
now
ever
you've got
does
me
it to
intrigued
that
now.
level.
All
What's
right.
that?
So, now you've got me intrigued, because when you say the word like radical, it was like, what did you do when you peeled back these onions? It may not be great practice now, and we're not going to go there, but you've just got to give me like a little bit of a teaser of what on earth.
And there are probably other processes and organizations that do all sorts. So as a kind of analogy, think of SAS, special ops type people. And what you normally hear is they get, I don't know, given a pack and some water and a few things to survive, and they're sent out for a week or weeks, and they just get broken down and broken down and broken down until, I suppose, they, eventually sort of have this. Yeah, what's that?
They have to rebuild after that.
That's right. And that's, that's a pretty standard, I think, practice to get someone ready for that kind of engagement. The general premise of the world I was in, was if we're going to be on stage and be talking about personal transformation and all these different things and principles and everything, we had to live them.
Yeah.
Personal integrity. So you kind of had to clean up your backyard in ways that, again, I wouldn't recommend anyone needs to do it, but give you an example. We had these, what we call these integrity files that we used to have to do. And it was all these layers of your integrity, your personal integrity. And you had to look at your entire past and basically go, anywhere I lied, cheated, stole something, withheld a communication, held on to resentments, regrets. I mean, it was just layers and layers and layers of stuff. We had to just try and work through everywhere. And then, that's what was a bit insane. I remember calling up some companies I'd worked for in the past and going, I'm going to give you $13.80 because I took a whole lot of stationery with me when I left, and that, that didn't have integrity because I didn't ask that. Or I pinched one of your clients, because I remember when I was in my early 20s, I had some clients, I used to train them at their house.
Yeah.
And they sort of paid me myself, and I never gave it to the company. So, and on and on. I mean, just like, so you basically, that's one aspect.
Wow.
And
okay.
and so you just had to deal with anything that might be between you and the people you're delivering to.
So is that really like you're going to stand up there and you're showing that you've got to be completely authentic to the audience because you're asking them to do exactly the same. So you've got to stand up there and be that person for them.
And it was a little bit, that's why I used the SAS kind of military analogy of like, the attempt was to have us be unshakable, that someone in the audience or that you were personally working with could go, I know that when you were in London in your early 20s, I saw you at clubs, blah, 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 because, I was moved to London when I was 20 years old and I was having a lot of fun, right? And we had to be like, just nothing would be like, yeah, that's right. So let's talk about you. Like it needed to be just, nothing could get under your skin, nothing could agitate you. However, that didn't always work because now I studied stress. So I left that organization. I was pretty burnt out. I was really into studying stress, which then ended up being a big part of my career.
Yeah.
Where I realized it didn't matter how mindful and aware, and I used to call it stick a fork in you and you're done. You're zen. And you've done all your mindful meditation and you've peeled back the onion layers, and then you'd be in some boardroom or an interaction and get completely triggered or hooked by stuff that you thought you'd dealt with, right? And so to a point, it was, it was amazing to not really have all that stuff to worry about. and go back through all your stuff in your childhood and your parents and your bullying at school and just everything, and kind of have that quite complete. But when I got into studying a lot more neurology and understanding the brain and especially stress, and if your stress levels are elevated, when your frontal cortex, the executive functioning part of your brain, doesn't have as much bandwidth or energy, then all that stuff locked in your sort of unconscious
comes to the fore,
runs the show. So kind of why I got into, back to your sort of original question, really, of behavioral consultant, is if we're not understanding our fundamental like physiology and biology and neurology, like the prehistoric sort of nature of ourselves, it honestly doesn't matter how transformed you are and how much mindfulness you do and any of that stuff. Active mindfulness is a word that I use, where it's like you have to actually go out into life and then see it's the matrix phenomenon, the bullets coming at you at the end of the matrix, and be able to slow them down enough so you manage your reactions and you manage your behaviors, and you still have the reactions.
Yeah.
And your brain still gets hijacked, but it's like, how quickly can you put a wedge in it and veto it? And that takes a whole other level of kind of understanding, which is sort of the stuff I developed for executives and business owners and everything from my learnings of before, and sort of taking the best out of all that. And then, understanding this whole world of stress and chronic stress. So that's what got me a lot more into the mental performance coaching, which after many years is more behavioral consultant is my general word that I use, but it's hard to describe what I do, to be honest.
And are people, and is actually, I literally just before I came here, I asked somebody to do something and see if they were available. And they came back and they went, I'm so sorry, I've got XY priorities. It's coming towards the end of the year. I've had a lot. And they were being very, very, very apologetic and like, I'm so sorry. And I actually replied back and went, I'm really pleased that you're acknowledging that you've got, this is happening. There'll be opportunities in the future. It's absolutely fine. You take care of yourself and, we'll catch up soon. And I got a beautiful reply going, thank you so much for your understanding. And part of me was a bit like, one, she didn't really need to explain to that level that she did, because who am I? She could have just said, I can't do it. But she said, thank you so much for just acknowledging that I'm prioritizing me and my family and other things
exactly
at the moment. And I think there needs to be that mindfulness from everybody to acknowledge that when someone does say it, even though I don't need an explanation. It was really nice, and I think she was very relieved that she wasn't letting me down, and I could understand where she was coming from.
And it's an important thing I try and have people remember is, yes, we don't have to explain or justify, always our reasons, but sometimes it's really good to, I call it, establish your ethics.
Yeah.
And occasionally, and this is sort of after I'd started to build my own consultancy work, I got introduced to a company, Influential You, which I'm now a partner in.
And I think that's how we sort of got connected, wasn't it?
That's how we got connected, through Rebecca, right? But what it also did is it's very pragmatic. It's a very pragmatic approach to understanding all these different essential areas of life that, like it or not, we have to try and figure out how to deal with them and tend to them, like health and family and education and money and career, all these areas. But this whole like work-life balance is a bit of a flaw. It's like simply what would satisfy. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, I just like this work-life balance is such a.
It's a trap.
It is a trap, and I think wherever you are in your life or whatever you're doing, there'll be different times that you'll have to put more emphasis on one thing than the other, etc. It's never going to be a balance. I think it's ever-changing, evolving.
Correct.
Because that's what life's like.
And back to the sort of being mindful. If you understand these different areas and what satisfaction would look like for you in each of them, and some of the programs at Influential You, we do all this work we call accurate thinking about each area. But then it's like, well, what's the pathway to doing that? And that's some of the work that I got to do. But what also happened during that is, and I coach and teach a lot of my clients this, is sometimes if you establish why you're declining something or accepting something is important. And we often will say at Influential You that you can get known or even respected more by what you're willing to decline than what you accept. And there's often a narrative out there is like, just say yes to everything, all opportunities. It's like quite often you stamp a bit of like authority or even ethics when you're willing to decline something. And I say, go one step further, and I'll be at an event quite often, and I'm shocking for being on time. You can tell I talk a lot. Sorry about that in advance. But to extricate myself sometimes from a social situation, it's very difficult. It's just, I'm just wired that way. And so I'll often say, Marissa, I need to leave in 10 minutes. So can you do me a favor? And can you make sure I'm out the door? Because I have a commitment to my husband. You know, we're having dinner or whatever it might be. And I'll sort of establish why I'm leaving is not just because I'm bored and I want to go.
No.
It's because I actually have a commitment to my relationship. Or, hey, I can't. Sometimes people want to schedule things with me early mornings. I'm like, love to. Sorry, that's my time for like health and fitness and thinking. So I think it's, you know, important to be able to establish like, you know, your ethics or sort of standards, because then people respect, and then they also know what to kind of invite you to or not invite you to. Like, so it does sometimes reduce the number of invitations you get, which isn't a bad thing, because people know where you stand.
Yeah. I think I'll give a personal story. I went through a period of time, so I've got 2 children, and there's nothing worse than your children starting to get their driving license, because then they want to take the younger one to every sports trip, and, you know, all of a sudden mum's not required to be the taxi service. And then that combined with me was my husband started to do shifts. So all of a sudden it sounds terrible, but I wasn't needed, right? And all of a sudden I had all this time and I didn't know what to do with myself. And I did throw myself into work.
Yes.
Which was fine, and that's great. I think I did get quite a lot of career progression during that time. But I look back now and I was like, I think I was grieving. And I just needed to feel needed. And then I just went through this other process. But it's fascinating to be able to reflect back and go, oh my gosh, you can see it so clearly, but when you're in it, you can't.
Not at all. And it's a great story, Marissa, to sort of reflect on, because everyone talks about purpose and passion and, you know, all these wonderful things that are very important, and having your sense of meaning in life. But often when you're a parent, people don't think about being a mum, for example, or even a dad. You know, some dads are way more involved and the mum's working, whatever. But the roles we play in life are obviously very important, but our roles also sort of determine our helpfulness or our value, right?
And our identity as well.
Identity, exactly. And what I'm needed for. And it's funny you say it, because the number of mums I've worked with over the years where they were like full on top of their game sort of professional, but then their career or their identity in the marketplace, which is really what career is, it's how you're known. And I say it in a really weird way. I say, your career is basically, what are you useful for?
I like that.
That's it. Like, if you think about a career, you go, what do people come to me for, to use me for some kind of help or value or whatever? That's our career, right? And so, like you said, suddenly the utility or the value that you were offering in the help is not needed anymore, and you're lost. And it's a really common thing. And it's also, funnily enough, common with not always, the few clients I get who they've exited a company. There's this one guy in particular last year I worked with where he set his company up so well that he goes in on a Wednesday to like run the payroll or something,
and that's it.
Twiddles his thumbs and he's had staff that have been there for 20 years, 25 years. Most people are 10, 15 years, like extraordinary.
Great tenure.
Yeah, and so you'd think he should be the happiest guy on the planet. when he got to me, he was actually depressed, like proper, embarrassed because he was feeling down, because most of the people around him would be like, dude, you're living the dream. This is what every business owner dreams of. But in the absence of some clearly articulated sort of purpose, mission, vision, whatever you want to call it, whatever word, but some sort of meaningful exchange that you're in with people that give you that sense of value, yeah, you'll get down and you will feel lost. And then what some people do is they mess with other areas of life.
Yeah.
When they actually have that either surplus or that freedom, or they'll go kind of start poking at things. They'll suddenly decide that their relationship isn't working, or they've got issues, or they'll start, messing with their health and their exercise, and that's often the trap.
Yeah, I must admit, way back when I used to work in the domestic abuse field, and we used to have, majority of the time we had a program, and it would be a personal development program, and we would work on empowering these females after they'd left quite a turbulent relationship, and we'd work with them over a period of time, and then in time they would get into a new relationship, etc., but it didn't have the drama of a previous relationship, and in some respects they used to sort of sabotage it.
Yeah,
it was.
Yep.
There was this, and so I can see that happening in other parts. When you're saying the poking, I can 100% reflect on that. But can I ask you a question, Drew? Is there any such thing as good stress?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I would even go further to say all stress is actually good in some ways. Like, it can have a positive consequence. Mostly it's just too much stress. That sounds a bit dumb to say that, but it's too much stress is not good. But whether it's good or bad is probably not the best way to think of it, because there is a term called eustress, EU stress, and that's the kind of thing they say is sort of the positive stress. And I'm going way back into the archives of my memory of when I used to nerd out on that stuff. Pretty sure eustress and distress is like these two terms, is that kind of polarity or positive, negative. But more, if I can do a quick little education for you, everyone else, is stress is not a feeling that we have. So that's the first thing I always try and say to people.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
So when someone says, there's an awesome podcast, and I don't do tons of podcasts, which is ironic. I'm on one. I do listen to some, but Andrew Huberman, which everyone knows, there's one he does on erasing fears, trauma, and anxiety or something. It's awesome. But he gives these really good operating definitions. And I've studied it for a long time, but it just crystallized even more. And he distinguishes the difference between fear, trauma, anxiety, and stress. Now, anxiety is definitely like a feeling you have.
Mm-hmm.
Fear is definitely a feeling you have. Trauma can, if it gets triggered, can lead to feelings. But stress is nothing more and nothing less than, and I'll do a simple version, stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, being released in your body in response to some either sort of external or internal threat or problem, you could call it, or disruption. And that's what stress is. So when you feel stressed, you could call that stress because it kind of leads to a feeling, but more it's like, are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling angry?
Another descriptor to it.
Yeah, but stress is just the cumulative load of all the different stressors that have been on your system over time. And the guy that coined the term stress, the godfather, and I'm sure there's contention with all those things when someone says they coined it, but in the 40s, Hans Selye, he borrowed it, I believe, from engineering, because he went, all these buildings, this is my interpretation, all these buildings are designed to withstand different stressors or stresses.
Yeah.
And if a hurricane comes along, they can probably handle it. But if too many, the building will start to degrade and not work. And then he did all these experiments on animals and things to see what happened if he put them in a stressful environment and then didn't remove the stressors. And it's horrible reading his 1940s book about what he did, but that was allowed then.
Yeah.
And then he would open up the animals and he would watch all these adaptations. Organs would expand, things would shrink. So then he sort of began to build these models, but ultimately it came to, there's this word allostatic load, or I like to think of it the way we adapt to stressors rather than we come back to balance when we've been under good or bad stress. We mostly adapt so that next time we can handle it. So the way I like to have people think about stress is, and I have almost every new person I work with has to do what I call an inventory of this load of stress. And they need to just over about a month examine all the different things. How much coffee do they drink? Because that's a stressor. Doesn't mean to say it's negative, but 7 cups of coffee for sure. Exercising or not exercising. What mental thoughts are you having that either add to your adrenaline and cortisol rising or don't? On and on, different things in your environment. So every little thing that puts a load on your system is a stressor. And so when you can do a cumulative kind of understanding of that, the number of people, Marissa, that just go, holy crap, I can now see why I'm feeling this way or why I've been burnt out or struggling, because you just add up the total and you go, well, it's no surprise for 20 years you've been, doing this, or you were going fine and then you had someone die and then COVID came along and then you had a baby and then is it any wonder why you're having all these symptoms of chronic stress? So stress is, just think about it as a load that is fluctuating at all times on your system. And if you can understand that and then manage sort of within the good boundaries, you should be mostly okay.
And so you're doing that with executives and founders and CEOs. And is that done?
And senior managers, a lot of senior managers, yeah.
Yeah. So is that sort of, when you are dealing with them, are you dealing with them just purely from that work environment, or are you looking at it holistically across the board with everybody?
Yeah, I sort of have a process that I've loosely coined whole human mapping. And so in the early stages of working just about with any individual, because I do a lot of team dynamic stuff to help people behave better together. As you see on my website, it says behave better, right? Yeah, it's like you've got to get in there and understand their whole life. And so I sort of go through this process where it's like a forensic inquiry, right? Just learn and try and understand the whole human. What environments did they traffic in when they were young? What schools did they go to? What were their parents like? Who were the key influences in their life that, shaped their brain and their behavior? Because if you can't understand all of that, then it's hard to understand why someone's behaving and acting and, work, operating. Yeah, and it's also hard for me to unpack a whole lot of stuff if I don't understand that whole picture of their life. Because sometimes the guy I was with today, he's doing fantastic professionally. He's at top of his game, but he's got the wheels falling off in other areas that have got nothing to do with his business, but it's starting to affect the performance in his business. So I'm just not a fan of this whole, I don't know if many people say it these days, but I still hear it's like, leave your personal life at home.
Oh, you can't.
I have quite a visceral reaction to that when people say it, but it's just rubbish,
It is. It's you can't just because you walk through a door or sit down at a desk, you can't switch off and throw yourself into something, 100%.
Well, I have a friend and her company's really cool called Equal X's here in New Zealand. She was a lawyer. I don't even think she practiced because she didn't like it, but she helps people who are either potentially separating or divorcing. Sometimes they don't, but to exit equally without all the stuff. Okay. She was telling me a long time ago the stats about a lack of productivity because someone is occupied by their intimate relationship challenges at work is way up there with like sick days
there's always something. I've managed staff for a long time, and you can always see something happening, and it's not a work-related issue, and you bring them in, and it'll always be something around their personal life.
Yeah.
And you can't switch it off. It's just having, as a manager or as a leader, is having that sort of emotional intelligence to support them or give them that time. Because the last thing they need to know is like, I'm taking sick days. Is that going to put my job at risk, or is it a monetary thing?
That's right.
And then it just all seems to compound and make the situation a lot worse if you don't necessarily have that understanding or support for somebody. So talking about the system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the system now, because you spoke about the stresses in buildings. And when you are talking about a person, you are talking about our system. But one of the things I know is that you've also got another company, which is an AI consultancy. So you're combining what you're doing behaviorally, us as a system, and this AI consultancy. Can you just expand a little bit on what you're doing in that space?
And I won't say too much about the AI consultancy, and it's not like it's hush-hush or anything, but we're not quite ready to launch yet. We're just in a kind of real beta phase. I found with working with so many people that there's a point we're at now where the integration of technology, but especially AI, is just pretty much ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Like, you can't escape. You know, my dad has to use his iPhone now. He resisted for years, but it's just, and so started to notice that clients are figuring out what to do with AI, not even on ChatGPT yet, like just either just like going, oh, I don't know what to do, or they're dabbling in it in ways that maybe aren't at all the best use of the tools. And so the more and more I talk to them, I was like, there's this big gap, and this is well researched, and a lot of the big magazines are talking about it. There's a big gap. Well, let's just buy a whole lot of AI tools or big SaaS products, and let's try and implement them. And it's not gone that well for especially big companies.
Because there's something called humans involved.
Exactly right. And so the emerging sort of work that I'm doing with an AI expert and a little team that we're building together, that's kind of currently like an extension of what I'm doing, but it's a whole other thing, is helping business owners, and their employees augment their intelligence and enhance and amplify their capacity and their ability by using all the right AI tools or frameworks or infrastructure that has them be able to be an even better human being. So our whole mission or ethos with that is, how do you help people integrate these amazing technologies, not to remove the humans, and there will be some humans who aren't needed with things, but mostly it's not AI that will replace people. No. And this is what all the experts are saying. It's not understanding or using it that will mean you get replaced, because you're not as useful. Yeah.
And I think you said a key word there, which is the augmented.
Yeah.
So it's the artificial plus the human to get the best results.
Correct. And for many years, I've been interested in, I mentored this young kid many years ago who was a blockchain expert. He was like 17, 18. And I was trying to understand it, and I'm just a bit dumb with that stuff. And I remember saying to him, I'm really interested in the intersection of big data, AI, and human behavior. And so I think there's just been this bubbling inquiry, and now it's come to that point where the human stuff was always there. The big data was massive, but now the AI is there, and it's like fascinating to see the humans are now having to confront an entire new thing in life, which is integrating and implementing and being educated on, how do I use all these tools? So we're not trying to look at building products or competing. Like, we just know there's a whole lot of people that, especially right now, and it might change, they have no idea what to do or how to even start with using it. So why it's a consulting business is because it's human-centric and very intimate. And so we'll be like very tangibly working with people to help them learn about this and understand it and adopt it in ways that works for them.
Yeah,
so
make it quite individual.
We have to look at their whole life. That's still going to be our same process, but we're going to now try and figure out, how do we use AI to, as I said, augment, enhance, improve their life, give them back some time, reduce their stress. And I might be delusional, because every other tech disruption in history that promised more bandwidth and more space and everything often has actually led to more people being stressed.
is it a tech disruption or is it a revolution?
See, good point. And I don't know, but I would say more revolution because
not the disruption.
I like the word revolution and maybe even an evolution of being human.
Maybe. All right.
And I'm the last person, Marissa, to be like on board with this stuff because I've doubled down on the human behavior side purposefully. But I'm like, I can't separate the two now.
No, that's not the world we live in. So thank you so much for Drew for coming on The Glass Ceiling. If people want to know more about you or get in touch with you, what's the best way?
My easiest way actually would just be drewknowles.com is my website. There's lots of stuff on there. It's got links to Influential You, the other company I'm a partner in. And LinkedIn is another one. I'm pretty prolific on LinkedIn, so hit me up there. And I hope that was okay, Marissa. I always have my own little bit of imposter syndrome of like, oh my God, how was I? But
no, don't be silly. Don't be silly. It was good. It was an interesting conversation, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers will enjoy it too.
Great. Thank you
very much.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Glass Ceiling. If you've liked what you heard, please subscribe, as we'd love to have you as part of our community. We're grateful to our guests for sharing their inspiring stories and insights with us. This podcast was brought to you by Wavebreaker. Join us next time as we shatter the glass ceiling, one story at a time.